Flashback. I'm 6 years old, and I have the perfect life. It's my first year playing soccer, and my dad is helping coach my team. I've just started second grade, and nothing could go wrong. Who could have known? In 1 year, my world would be flipped upside down, and I would be tested every day. It all started my third grade year at Ridgefield School. Every day, except for Wednesdays, we got out at 2:50. For 4 years now, I have been getting out at school at 2:50 every day, except for Wednesdays. And every day, my dad would be there to pick me and my sister up because my mom had to work from 8 to 6. Every day, until one day. I remember it pretty clearly because it was the first time I had a taste of what was to come and all the responsibility it brought. It was the start of a new life. It was 3:30, and still my dad hadn't shown up to pick us up from school. By then, most of the kids were gone, or their parents were showing up, so the yard lady told us to go sit in front of the office and wait. I knew my dad should have been there by now, so I tried calling him over and over, but he never answered. It was now 4:30, an hour and a half later, and teachers were leaving, and me and my sister were still sitting in front of the office. My little sister Courtney, only being in kindergarten, was very impatient and almost crying because she was so hungry. At this point, and let me remind you, I was only in third grade. I thought I was going to have to spend the night at school. I was so scared. Doing the only logical thing I could think of, I told Courtney to run towards the road and start walking, because I didn't want the office ladies to see us. I have never walked home in my life, so I didn't know any of the shortcuts. All I knew was the way we drove to school each morning. Trying to assure this little kindergartner that it was okay that we walked and we wouldn't be in trouble was the hardest thing ever. But after I offered to carry her backpack, she decided maybe it wasn't so bad. It was only about 2 miles from the school to my house, but for a third grader and a kindergartner, it was like walking to Red Bluff and back. When we finally got home and walked through the door, I was in complete shock. There was my dad, sleeping on our couch. I remember walking over to him and shaking him and saying, "Dad, where were you?" His reply was, "Oh, what time is it?" It was 5:30, and instead of being mad, I was just embarrassed that I had to walk home because my own dad wasn't responsible enough to remember his kids. Fast forward a couple weeks, and the same thing was happening, only this time, I wasn't going to wait till 4:30 to walk. After all the buses and kids had left, me and my sister started walking, and all I hoped for is that no one would see us. I don't know why I was so ashamed of walking home. I guess I just knew it opened up doors for adults to ask why, and I didn't want to have to tell them it was because my dad was too lazy. I swear, if it wasn't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all, because as soon as we got 100 feet away from the school, a classmate's mom pulled up and asked if we needed a ride. Right as I was about to say, "Oh, no thank you," my sister screams, "Yeah!" because she was so happy we weren't going to have to walk. I was so embarrassed and didn't think it could get any worse, but I spoke too soon. When we pulled into my driveway, my friend's mom asked, "So, where's your dad?" I lied and said he was at work, but she knew the truth. His truck was sitting right there in the driveway. When I think about it now, I laugh, because back then, I thought it was such a big deal, and I really believed my dad was just lazy. It's not until now I realized it was a habit my dad was trying to break, and it was only the beginning of things to come. Fast forward 1 year to 4th grade. My mom and dad fighting is a constant thing. Unlike most kids who block out their parents, I sat in another room and listened to the tone of my mom's voice. Not because I favored her, but because I knew about my dad's drug addiction, and I didn't know what he was capable of doing. Drugs were the new love of my dad's life, and it affected all of us. Newspaper articles were released about my dad's recent visit to the county jail for being pulled over with drugs, and people started talking. Rehab was the last option, and instead of fighting it, he took it. He was there for months, and through the awkward visits to Napa Valley with my grandparents and mom every weekend, all I remember was the long walks we took to catch up, the family counseling meetings we were never allowed in, and the goodbye hugs that never seemed like enough. When my dad got out of rehab, it was like nothing had ever happened. My family swept things under the rug, and talking about everything that had happened and how we were feeling was out of the question. It was like if they pretended it never happened, nobody else would believe it did either. Being around this made me feel like I was living in a hell I couldn't let anyone find out about. I had to pretend my family was perfect, that McCoy image that I've heard other parents refer to. This was not the end, but rather the beginning of a long downward spiral for my perfect family. The next year, my 5th grade year, was the start of the divorce because my dad had fallen back into his old ways and drugs. Who knew people could fight over glass vases and furniture that meant nothing to either person, but the thought of losing it to the other meant total failure. It took 2 years to finalize their divorce. Mediators were brought in to decide who my siblings and I would be living with, and each parent wanted us to just be honest and choose who we felt more comfortable living with. All 3 of us heard the hinting in their voices and knew they didn't really want us to be honest. When the mediator first asked me who I'd rather live with, immediately I said my mom. At least I could rely on her. But when it came time to tell them why I didn't want to live with my dad, I couldn't find one negative word to say about him. I felt like if I was in protection mode, and telling them about my dad's ugly secrets just wasn't going to happen. He was still my dad. Nobody but my family was supposed to know about what went on behind closed doors. After deals were made and we were told that my brother, sister, and I would be permanently living with my mom, but would stay with my dad at our grandparents' house, where he lived every other weekend. 4 days out of each month, I dreaded. I'm not sure whether it was the fact that my dad made it obvious that he really had no interest in us by sleeping all day while coming down from his recent drug high, or the fact that every time my grandparents left us alone with him, I was scared whether to eat that night. Just ask me how I learned to make spaghetti. My grandparents left on a horseback riding trip, and my dad was pretty much in a sleep coma. After numerous times, I gave up trying to wake him up and started going through cupboards. I found packaged noodles and red pesto sauce and cooked it the best I could. Let's just say we ate spaghetti for every single meal that weekend and the next. Stuffing our bags with food became a normal thing for us. There was actually one point between the numerous times he went to jail where he finally moved out of my grandparents' house and into his own apartment across the street from the high school. My sister, brother, and I all shared a mattress on the floor with a sheet. The only things that consumed the fridge and cupboards were a bag of hot dog buns, a jar of peanut butter and jelly, and 2 cans of refried beans. I tried to mask all the worriedness from my face every time I went there. I was sad that my 37-year-old dad had nothing to eat for himself, let alone us kids. When he asked if I wanted a peanut butter and jelly bun with a half-hearted smile, I said no, because that was all he had to survive on. I didn't eat all that weekend, except for ice cubes. No matter how many times my dad seemed to disappoint me, he was still my dad, and I did my best to make sure he could survive and make things as easy as possible for him, even when I knew another chance was the last thing he needed. When I entered high school, things got harder. My dad was in and out of jail more frequently. Letters with a cell number and a picture was our only communication. When he was out, his time was consumed by his white trash girlfriend named Kim, who already had 2 kids in Colorado and looked just as strung out on drugs as he did. My sister and I absolutely hated her, so we did everything just like the movies to get rid of her. We sprayed her phone with hairspray, poured salt in all her drinks, and even cut the boob parts out of some of her shirts. She must have seen the movie Mean Girls, because she wore those shirts proud. Even having to deal with Kim wasn't the worst of my problems. My mom had just taken a traveling job that took her out of state Monday through Thursday. We started living at home with my aunt, but waking up early every day to go home and get ready for school was just too much. Me, my brother, and sister started living alone at my house. My aunt would come and make us dinner and take us to school and practice, but other than that, we were on our own. For those of you who didn't know me then, I was a mom. Talk about growing up all at once. Sometimes I'd wonder why God would put me through so much and didn't let me have that normal teenage life like other kids. But I knew someday the answer would come. In the meantime, I tried my best to make the most out of my high school years. While balancing good grades and sports and playing mom, I decided I was going to try out the party life. It was the end of my sophomore year, and I decided I was going to invite people over for a party after a basketball game. I didn't think anyone would show up, but surprisingly, the whole basketball team showed up to my house. I guess some of their parents didn't appreciate the fact that their kids had lied to them and went to my house, because Monday morning, I got pulled out of drill team and had a chat with my Aunt Corrine, you all know as Miss Madej. Since the day my family found out about my dad's drug addiction, I could tell my family was worried about my future. I was always the rebel, the wild child that had no fear and was always getting in trouble and taking the blame for everyone. I could see it all in their eyes, that look of doubt. When my aunt started talking to me, I knew she was only looking out for me. But for some reason, when she said the words, "We just don't want you to end up like your father," it stuck. It was like a shot to the heart. My own family had the nerve to think I would let myself become the very thing I despised and was embarrassed about. From that day on, almost unconsciously, I tried my hardest to prove to my family I would never make the same mistakes as my dad. Even with the good grades and striving to always be the best at every sport and activity I was involved in, somehow felt like it was never enough. I always felt like I was stuck in the shadows of my dad's past judgments, and it wasn't just my family who viewed me this way. Since the first time my dad made it into the newspapers, adults and other kids looked at me with pity and judgment and would ask, "Oh, what did he do?" I'd tell them, and they'd pretend to be sorry, but I knew all they cared about was the real story. I mean, this is small-town Corning. For so long, I have been viewed in my dad's shadow and have seen him go in and out of jail, promising things would change next time. I lost all hope, and literally hated him for always failing and giving into the drugs. I hated him because he was part of the reason I couldn't go to a high school party like any other kid without getting pulled out of class Monday or threatened to be kicked off drill team. I hated him for bringing on death threats to my family because he was in jail and couldn't pay his drug dealers the money they wanted. I hated him because every time someone asked me how he was doing, I had to say, "I really don't know." For so long, I hated my dad for a million different reasons. Until one crazy day during the Every 15 Minutes program, where I realized I wasn't the only one who's been through hell and back twice and been let down a time or two. While writing my goodbye letter to my family as if I knew I was going to die tomorrow, I thought about how much I've let others dictate my life. I thought about how I've done almost everything to prove something to someone else instead of doing what makes me happy. The day I stood up in front of the whole school and read my goodbye letter was the day I forgave my dad for all of his mistakes. I told the whole student body what I had found out just 2 days before, that my dad would not be at my high school graduation on June 7th. Instead, he would be in jail paying for his mistakes. At the time, I thought I would never let him live this down. But that day, in front of the school, I realized I would miss him if he was gone. So I forgave him. I destroyed the idea of having some family image to uphold, and now I'm sitting here telling you my life story. I am not a perfect person, and I have and will make mistakes, but now I know who I'm living for, and I'm not stuck in my dad's shadows. I believe in the idea of forgiveness. You will never know when the end is near. Through the fights and struggles and the million disappointments, I realized even though my dad is not the person he should be and is capable of, the man deep down from when I was 6 is still searching for a way out. How can you give up on something like that? Forgiveness isn't about the person who has done wrong. Forgiveness is about yourself. You have to look past their wrongdoings and think about how you want to live the rest of your life. Do you want to live life full of hate? Or can you look into the eyes of someone who has hurt you so bad and forgive them for all the struggles they've put you through? Forgiveness is about you growing as a person and being able to see the suffering that is going on in someone else's mind. I forgave my dad because deep down, he was suffering from something he truly couldn't control anymore. I had to forgive him so I could let go all of the hatred and find myself again. This I believe.